My name is Morgan Hayes. I'm 37 years old, and for the longest time, my own family treated my bank account like a 24-hour emergency hotline they could dial anytime they wanted. No please, no thank you, and definitely no asking permission. That all came to a head 2 weeks before Christmas last year. I was sitting at my desk in the inspection office in Pittsburgh, surrounded by stacks of maintenance reports and safety photos from elevator sites. My job as an elevator safety investigator means I spend my days crawling through mechanical systems, piecing together why things went wrong, and making sure nobody else gets trapped or hurt. It's not glamorous, but it's taught me to spot tiny cracks that could turn into big disasters. Little did I know that same skill would soon blow up my own family. The door to my office swung open without a knock. In walked my older brother, Mark, 41 years old, looking like he owned the place. He dropped a thick envelope right on top of my keyboard and jabbed his finger at the total printed in bold at the bottom, $16,000. "Cover my son's college stuff," he said, his voice flat and commanding. "Dorm, laptop, meal plan, the whole thing is due before January." He didn't sit down. He didn't ask how I was doing. He didn't even pretend to care if I could actually afford it. It felt like I had missed a payment on some debt I never agreed to. I slid the invoice back across the desk toward him. "Not happening, Mark." His jaw tightened. For a second, I thought he might argue, but instead he forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "We'll talk about it at Christmas dinner." That smile sent a chill down my spine. It wasn't warm or hopeful. It was the kind of smile someone gives when they already have the next 3 moves planned. A week later, I stopped by our parents' house to drop off some spare keys. As I walked up to the kitchen door, I heard voices drifting through the half-closed door. Mark was talking in that confident tone he always used when he thought he had everything figured out. "Don't worry, after Christmas dinner she'll pay. I already told everyone she promised." My mom answered without missing a beat. "Of course she will. That's her role in the family." I stood there frozen in the hallway, the keys digging into my palm so hard the metal teeth left little marks. They weren't hoping I would help. They were setting up a trap, planning to corner me in front of aunts, uncles, and cousins, using my nephew Ethan's future as the perfect emotional weapon. The worst part? They sounded so sure of themselves, like this was just how things worked in our family. What they didn't know was that something about that $16,000 invoice had been bothering me from the moment Mark dropped it on my desk. The college logo looked real enough, but the payment instructions felt off. The routing numbers didn't match anything I remembered from Ethan's earlier school paperwork. That night, instead of getting excited about Christmas, I changed my plans completely. I called the university directly the next morning, and what I learned cracked open a lie much bigger than just tuition money. By Christmas Eve, I had already started digging. But let me take you back a bit so you understand why this hit me so hard. Growing up, Mark was always the golden child with so much potential. When he failed a class, Mom blamed the teacher. When he wrecked Dad's truck in the middle of summer, she said the roads were tricky, even though the sun was shining. Meanwhile, when I earned a scholarship, Mom's response was, "Good, now we can focus more on helping your brother." I learned early that my achievements didn't earn me love or protection. They just made me useful. That pattern followed us into adulthood like a bad shadow. When Mark's first business went under, I covered 2 months of his mortgage because Ethan shouldn't lose his home. When he needed expensive dental work, I paid because his insurance supposedly lapsed. When his car broke down, I sent $4,000 after he swore it was the last time. He never paid me back. Instead, every time I helped, it became proof that I could afford to help again. There was one sacrifice I never told anyone about. At 32, I got offered a big supervisory job in Denver. Better pay, bigger team, even a chance to help write national safety standards. 3 days before I was supposed to accept, Dad had a mild stroke. Mark said his work schedule was too unpredictable to help, so I turned down the position and stayed in Pittsburgh for 8 long months. I drove Dad to every rehab appointment, coordinated his care, and still showed up at construction sites for inspections. Mark visited twice. Yet at family gatherings, Mom still introduced him as the devoted son who kept everyone's spirits high. By the time Mark slapped that fake invoice on my desk, I had already stopped lending money for almost a year. He knew it. That's why his confidence felt so rehearsed, like he was following a script he was sure would work. The morning after I overheard that conversation in the kitchen, texts started pouring in from relatives. My aunt wrote, "You're doing such a wonderful thing for Ethan." A cousin I barely talked to sent, "16,000 is generous, but education is the best gift." Mark had already told everyone I agreed to pay, turning my refusal into a public promise. He figured embarrassment would force me to go along with it. Then Ethan called me, sounding nervous. "Aunt Morgan, Dad says I should thank you for the college money?" I closed my office door and spoke carefully. "Ethan, I haven't agreed to pay anything." There was a long pause. "He said you were just pretending to say no so you could surprise everyone at Christmas." That's when I knew I needed to see the real numbers. I asked Ethan to send screenshots from his student account. He hesitated at first. Mark had warned him not to confuse me with details, but he eventually did. The real balance was only $6,240. The invoice Mark gave me demanded $16,000. Nearly $10,000 had nothing to do with Ethan's actual school costs. My stomach dropped. I stared at that piece of paper on my desk and realized this wasn't just entitlement anymore. It looked a lot like fraud. I searched the routing number printed on the fake invoice. It didn't lead to the university. It pointed to a local credit union branch just a mile from Mark's old furniture store. That evening, Mark texted me again. "Bring a cashier's check to Christmas. Make it payable exactly like the invoice says. Don't make this awkward for Ethan." I didn't reply. Instead, I saved the message, printed the real university statement, and started my own quiet investigation. Years of examining broken elevator systems had trained me well. Look for the altered dates, missing signatures, numbers that seem right until you check them against the original source. Those habits had saved lives before. Now they were about to expose my own brother. I called the university's financial office the next day. They confirmed the routing instructions on Mark's paper had nothing to do with them. Laptops were bought separately, and no legitimate bill would ever direct payment to a random credit union account. My hands were shaking as I hung up the phone. This wasn't just pressure to help with college. Something much darker was going on. As Christmas lights twinkled on houses around my neighborhood and carols played faintly in the distance, I sat in my quiet apartment, surrounded by printed documents and screenshots. I thought about all the times I had stepped up, all the opportunities I had given up, and all the ways my family had come to expect it. This time felt different. This time, I wasn't just saying no. I was preparing to show everyone exactly why. The stage was set for Christmas dinner, but it wasn't going to be the performance Mark had planned. Little did he know I was bringing receipts that would change everything. The days leading up to Christmas felt heavy, like the air before a big storm. I kept replaying Mark's texts in my head while sitting at my kitchen table late at night, surrounded by papers and my laptop screen glowing in the dark. "Bring the cashier's check. Don't make this awkward for Ethan." The words made my blood boil. He wasn't asking for help. He was giving orders, counting on the whole family to back him up and pressure me into folding. I didn't sleep much those nights. Instead, I dug deeper. Ethan had sent me more screenshots from his student portal, and the picture became clearer and scarier. A $4,800 student loan refund had been deposited 3 weeks earlier, but Ethan never saw a dime of it. The destination account ended with the same 4 numbers as the fake invoice Mark had given me. When I asked Ethan about it over the phone, his voice dropped to a whisper from his bedroom. "Dad helped me set up the portal," he said. "He told me the refund would stay with the school for other costs." My heart ached for my nephew. At 18, he should have been excited about starting college life. New friends, late-night study sessions, figuring out who he wanted to be. Instead, he sounded scared and confused, worried he might get his own father in trouble. Ethan, listen to me. I told him gently but firmly. I need you to change every password right now. Turn on two-factor authentication. Then contact the university's fraud office first thing tomorrow. This isn't your fault, but we have to fix it. He was quiet for a long moment. What if Dad gets arrested? I don't want to ruin everything. I took a deep breath. Protecting someone from the consequences of taking your money doesn't fix trust. It just gives them time to do it again. The next few days, Mark called me over and over, 6 times in one afternoon. I let every call go to voicemail. His messages started sweet and patient, then turned nasty. Morgan, Mom says you're creating unnecessary stress. Later ones sounded more like threats. Everyone will be at Christmas dinner, so we're settling this then. The last one cut deepest. You've always needed to feel important. Here's your chance to be the hero. Pay the bill. I saved every single message, exported the audio files, and added them to a secure folder on my computer. This wasn't about emotion anymore. It was about facts, dates, and proof. Just like when I investigate a broken elevator cable or a failed safety switch, I build a clear timeline so nobody can twist the story later. I went through the fake invoice again, this time checking the file properties. The author name showed M. Hayes, and the template was created on a computer from Heritage Home Interiors, Mark's employer. Something felt wrong. I called the store pretending I needed to verify his employment for a reference. The receptionist got quiet. Mark hasn't worked here since October, she finally said. Fired. 2 months before he dropped that invoice on my desk. A former co-worker reached out to me later that day after hearing I had called. He told me Mark had been let go after customer deposits went missing from 3 different sales accounts. The company didn't press charges because Mark promised to pay the money back. His first deadline? December 27th. The exact amount he owed them was $9,460, almost exactly the extra cash he had padded onto Ethan's fake college bill. It all clicked into place like the gears in one of the old elevators I inspect. Mark wasn't just trying to get me to pay for school. He had stolen his son's loan refund, lost his job for stealing from customers, and now planned to use my money to cover his tracks and keep up appearances as the hard-working dad. I met Ethan at a small coffee shop near campus the day before Christmas. Snow was falling lightly outside the window, and holiday music played softly in the background. He looked exhausted, dark circles under his eyes, clutching his cup like it was the only steady thing in his life. At 18, he carried the weight of a grown man's problems. He's been opening my mail for years, Ethan admitted quietly. Lately, he kept pushing me to sign blank financial aid forms. I thought he was just helping. I reached across the table and squeezed his hand. Real help doesn't need secrets, Ethan. I'm not going to hand money to your dad or quietly fix this behind the scenes. If I help at all, it goes straight to the school or through accounts only you control. You make the decisions. He nodded slowly, looking both relieved and terrified. Before we left, he asked, "Are you really going to tell everyone at Christmas dinner?" "I'm going to give your dad one chance to tell the truth himself," I said. "But I want the whole family to see he had that choice." Deep down, I knew Mark wouldn't take it, but staying silent would let him spin the story that I had abandoned Ethan. No more. The years of covering for him, paying his bills, and giving up my own opportunities had to end. That night, I built a simple digital presentation on my tablet. Nothing flashy, just clear dates, documents, and facts. The day Mark lost his job, the day Ethan's refund disappeared, the day the fake invoice was created, the day he demanded the check. I also packed a small, locked case with one important item, the spare key to the townhouse where Mark and Ethan lived. My parents owned the place, but I had quietly paid for almost every major repair for 7 years. New furnace, roof fixes, electrical work. Mark treated it like his forever free home. That was about to change too. Christmas morning arrived with bright winter sunlight streaming through my windows. Mark posted a family photo online with the caption, "Grateful for the people who step up when it matters." I wasn't in the picture. Relatives commented about how lucky he was to have such a generous sister. He liked every single one. By early afternoon, I knew exactly what he had planned. My Aunt Linda called, excited. "Should I record the big college surprise? Mark said you're giving Ethan the check after dessert." I arrived at my parents' house at 5 o'clock, still wearing my charcoal work suit from an emergency inspection earlier that day. No gifts, no dessert, just the truth in my bag and years of built-up courage in my chest. Mark laughed when he saw me. "You dressed like you're going to court." I looked him straight in the eyes. Maybe I like being prepared. His smile slipped for just a second. That small crack told me everything. The performance was about to begin, but this time I wasn't playing the role he had written for me. As we gathered around the big dining table with 14 family members chatting and passing dishes, the tension hummed under the holiday cheer. I could feel the storm coming, but I was ready. The truth had been buried long enough. The dining room glowed with warm lights from the old chandelier Mom had hung years ago. 14 of us squeezed around the long table covered with her best dishes: roast turkey, mashed potatoes, green beans, and all the usual holiday favorites. Laughter and clinking glasses filled the air at first, but underneath it all, I could feel the weight of what was coming. Mark sat near the head of the table looking confident, like a director ready for his big scene. Ethan kept his eyes on his plate. Mom kept glancing at me with that hopeful, warning look she always gave when she wanted things to stay smooth. Before anyone could even pick up their forks, Mark stood up and tapped his glass with a spoon. The room quieted down. He thanked Mom for the beautiful meal, praised Ethan for being the first Hayes grandson to go to college, and then turned toward me with that same rehearsed smile from my office. "And I want to recognize my sister, Morgan," he announced proudly. "She may act tough, but she knows family comes first. Tonight she's taking care of Ethan's entire spring semester bill." Applause broke out around the table. My aunt raised her phone to record. Mom beamed at me like my opinion on the matter didn't even count. Ethan stared hard at his plate, his shoulders tense. Mark stretched out his hand toward me. "You can give him the check now." I stayed seated, my voice calm but clear. "I didn't bring one." The clapping died away awkwardly. Mark tried to laugh it off. "She loves building suspense, doesn't she?" I looked straight at him. "I said no when you came to my office. I said no in every message you ignored. There was never a check." Mom's face tightened. "Morgan, we discussed this." "No," I replied. "You and Mark discussed it. I was just assigned my usual role." Mark leaned forward, his voice dropping. "Don't humiliate your nephew because you're mad at me." That's when Ethan suddenly looked up, his voice stronger than I expected. "Dad, stop saying this is all for me." The whole room went silent. You could hear the heater humming in the background. Mark's voice turned sharp. "We talked about this, Ethan." "No, you talked," Ethan shot back. "You told me to thank her for money she never promised." Mom looked back and forth between them, confused. Ethan pulled out a folded paper from his pocket and placed it on the table. "My real balance is only $6,240. Mark's confident mask started to crack. "That doesn't include everything." "It includes housing and the meal plan," Ethan said. "I never asked for a new laptop." Aunt Linda slowly lowered her phone. Dad's expression shifted from confusion to something darker. I opened my small locked case and laid Mark's fake invoice right next to the official university statement. "The document Mark gave me is fake," I said. "The payment account doesn't belong to the university." Mark pushed his chair back. "You called the school behind our backs? You had no right to investigate me." I kept my voice steady. "I investigate falsified records for a living, Mark. That's my job." Mom reached for the papers like touching them might make the problem disappear. "Mark, explain this." He answered too fast. "It's just a holding account. The school recommended it." Ethan shook his head. "No, they didn't. That account received my student loan refund, $4,800. I never authorized it. Questions exploded around the table. Mark tried to talk over everyone, accusing Ethan of misunderstanding and me of turning his son against him. He claimed it was all a university mistake and he would fix it after the holidays. I let him dig himself deeper until his stories started falling apart. Then I asked the question I knew would hit hardest. Were you fired from Heritage Home Interiors back in October? Mark's face went pale. Mom whispered, "Fired?" He glared at me. "That's none of your business." Dad stood up so fast his chair hit the wall. "Answer her, Mark." Mark's voice grew sharp with panic. "I borrowed some money. I was going to put it back." "And Ethan's loan refund?" I pressed. He pointed at me, his face red. "You don't understand what it costs to raise a kid. You have no husband, no children, no real responsibilities. You sit in your nice apartment judging the rest of us who actually have lives." There it was, the real contempt he had been hiding behind every request for money. My success was selfish when I kept it, but a family resource when he needed it. "I understand exactly what you planned," I said quietly. "You added the amount you owed your old employer to Ethan's college bill. You wanted me to send $16,000 straight to your account so you could pay back the missing customer deposits and pretend everything was fine." The room erupted. Mom covered her mouth. "Tell me that isn't true." Mark didn't answer. The silence that followed felt heavy, like something finally breaking after years of strain. He tried to fight back by slamming his hand on the table. "So what if I moved the refund? It was for the family. Ethan still needs school. I needed to protect my job, and Morgan has more money than she knows what to do with." Dad's voice cut through. "You didn't protect your job. You lost it." Mark kept going. "I would have fixed everything if she had just helped me." That line turned even more relatives against him. Aunt Linda asked, "When you told us Morgan volunteered, you knew she had already said no?" I connected my tablet to the TV in the next room and showed the simple timeline I had built. Dates, documents, messages, everything laid out clearly. Mark rushed toward the screen, but Dad stepped in front of him. "Sit down," he said in a tone I had never heard him use with Mark before. The arguments grew louder. Mark blamed me for poisoning the family. Ethan stood up for himself, saying his father had taken money from his summer job deposits too. Mom begged everyone to keep it inside the family, but I stood firm. Handling it quietly is how we learned consequences don't matter. Dad pulled out a folder and placed an official occupancy notice on the table. "You have 60 days to move out of the townhouse," he told Mark. "We're selling it. Part of the money will go into a proper education trust for Ethan that neither of you can touch." Mark looked stunned. Mom gasped. The free house that had let him survive every failure was being taken away. I placed the spare key next to the notice. "I paid for the furnace, the roof, the electrical work," I said. "I kept this key because every emergency became my problem. Not anymore." Mark swept some papers onto the floor in anger. "Fine. You all want me to be the villain? Morgan gets to be the perfect daughter again." I didn't raise my voice. "This isn't a contest. You forged a bill, took your son's money, and tried to force me to cover it. Those are your choices." The dinner ended in chaos. No dessert. Mark demanded Mom drive him home, but Dad took the car keys and told him to call a ride. Mark stood by the front door waiting for someone to stop him. No one did. Before he left, he looked back at Ethan with cold eyes. "When this falls apart, remember who caused it." Ethan answered calmly, "You always told me never to blame others for my choices." The door slammed. Mom collapsed into a chair, crying that we had ruined Christmas. But the truth had finally come out, raw and painful, and nothing would ever be the same again.